Well, thanks everybody for joining me. I realize when the sun comes out, no one shows up at events. So I appreciate those of us that are in the room, and I appreciate also giving up a little bit of vitamin D here to kind of bring us together. I'll kind of more properly introduce myself in just a second, but I wanted to start off by sort of focusing on this little quote. So in 2018, there was an investor that kind of wrote about this whole dynamic of first impressions are important and they certainly count, but last impressions are forever. And it got me thinking even a few years ago about all these incredible pitch competitions, whether you're at a hack startup kind of weekend or you're actually doing Venture Bridge or Y Combinator, about you do all this work to do that kind of 1 to 5 minute pitch, only to kind of find yourself in the last section of that pitching dynamic where you're asked 1, 2, or maybe 3 questions that maybe get a little passive aggressive, or as we lovingly say here in the Schwartz Center, aggressive aggressive, and can undo all that amazing preparation you've done. So today's whole frame is around how to nail the last 2 to 3 questions that you get asked after preparing sometimes 6 or 12 months just to make those first 60 or 120 seconds count. Sound good? All right. Real quick context about me. We don't have to spend too much time here, but I've been around CMU for a little over a decade, which reminds me that I'm getting a smidge on the old side. I started actually teaching in Tepper, wasn't even in this building across the way. In fact, some of those of you who have met me from 10 years ago know that I started teaching just Jedi mind tricks, persuasion, and influence dynamics, but now I spend most of my time around the School of Computer Science. The big body of work that I focus on is persuasion and influence inside of artificial intelligence. So how do we get models in an ethical way to sort of persuade, influence, or ultimately change behavior of folks that in this case kind of works or ends in people doing things like buying a product or service or potentially feeling like their customer service issue is resolved. Throughout my career, I've spent about equal parts in the sales and revenue and marketing side of the house as I have on kind of the technical product or engineering side, which is a little bit of a unique bend. In fact, as I get older, I end up getting more and more technical in nature. But the body of work that I spent kind of building or in and around questions actually started really about 3-ish years ago. I had been teaching an executive education program that graduated about 600 kind of senior execs or managing directors of global organizations every year. And we were focusing on how do you take really technical leaders, so think managing directors at consulting firms or large healthcare organizations, and make them much, much better at talking to non-technical colleagues. So these particular consultants that were managing directors were great at influencing the CTOs and CIOs of a business, but they were kind of poor at influencing the CEOs or kind of non-technical leaders in those businesses about really important issues like cloud technology, or in modern times, things like generative AI, or in the fleeting moment we all had Web3 or whatever the buzzword of the day was. So along that journey, one of the modules that I focused on was something called hostile FAQs, or hostile frequently asked questions. And interestingly enough, that very focused module became actually a center stage thing that we did with groups of 50 to 60 managing directors at a time, where all they would do is take inventory of the most aggressive questions they were getting from prospects or clients, and then work towards really consistent systems to answer those questions in a really big way. We did that all throughout kind of 21. And when we got to 2022, here's an interesting kind of observation we had. If you as a founder, a product leader, an engineering or a sales leader, can answer your top 50 to 100 questions about an idea that you're pitching to investors or ultimately a B2B product or service, your sales cycle can actually get shrunk by almost 40%. Now, the simple logic in this is as follows. If you can answer the really defining, differentiated questions you're getting asked in the moment, or really close to when you had the meeting, people will inherently make a decision faster, which means less competition is in, which means there's less opportunities to compete on price or kind of classically defined service and the like. So I went as far, and we'll even have an opportunity if we want to today to show you the tool that we built that's not even publicly available yet, that actually does this method and overlays AI to help you generate and answer those questions, called Skill Builder. But the important part today is what I'm going to be working you through is the analog kind of research methods we used to discover just how to identify those questions, and more importantly, how to answer them really effectively. Sound good? All right. So we are going to have to kind of keep everybody awake here on me, even though, we have a couple dozen people online and those in the room, by using something called Slido. So if you can pull out your phone, as we've all become oh so familiar with in the world of the pandemic or post-pandemic, you can either scan that QR code, or you can go to slido.com for those that are following online, if it's easier then scanning the QR code, and type in that number at the bottom. It reads, I think, like 3431509. And you'll know that you are in the right place and space because we collectively as a unit will see people typing in the top left. We'll see people that have answered in the top right. We'll see a few people that have decided to plug in the code. Hopefully we'll work our way kind of through all that. So if you've scanned the QR code, you can just respond with normal text or emojis. If you are going to the website slido.com, you'll have to type it in. So this is just to warm everybody up about a particular question or reaction. So what's an easy observation? We just sort of look at the visual storytelling we're all doing here. Somebody wants to raise their hand or just kind of shout it out, or feel free to type it online. You know, what are we really saying? How do we feel about investor pitches and judges? What's the overall kind of vibes here?
Seems like it's nervous.
Nervous, right? Anxious, right? Unclear, right? We all feel these kind of ways, right? Because in some ways there's power dynamics involved, right? We're coming in our most vulnerable moment, typically about something we worked really hard to pay attention to. We then pitch it to sort of more or less a group of strangers. And then in 1 and 2 minutes or less, they make snap judgments about the entirety of our work. Not a world-changing, great positive experience. So we can see across the board here that there's a variety of ways to come together. Even words as directing as kind of terrifying, but hopefully we'll move this more towards exciting or sort of ambitious by the time we are done. What that means then, as far as bringing us all together here, is that we are going to face a variety of means to pitch. Here's another kind of question for you, though. How do you feel about pitching today? Let's kind of do a little bit of kind of quantitative way to spin this. Let's kind of quantify those emojis for everything that's going on. All right, so like everything else at CMU, there's sort of a visual demonstration here of the phrase, it depends, right? So most people aren't willing to say that I'm ready to crush it. Other people aren't willing to say that I'm terrible at it. So like many things, we turn to average. Here's the challenge with that when it comes to the question and answer section. If you are not particularly clear and articulate in the Q&A section, even with the amazing first impression you made, you're going to leave everybody feeling like low energy. You know, you're going to present and then transfer that insecurity you have. So we sort of have to move ourselves into this place where we can hopefully find a few people, of which there's apparently zero, that feel amazing about pitching. But perhaps that's why you're here with me today. All right. So in order to understand some of the treachery that we uncover in the Q&A section at the end, I want to highlight 7 or so types of questions, at least in their template or their pattern or their frame that you might get. So things like a closed question, right? Sometimes we call these polar questions or binary questions, really kind of sums up to the idea that you are being forced to answer yes or no. So sort of one of the ways, right, that an investor or potentially a customer will challenge you is to force you into a box where they take out all the nuance. So you can see here in my example that's on the screen, have you actually done this before? This is a really important thing to appreciate, especially when you're doing early stage pitching, because one, your entire method or solution may have never been done before. And more importantly, if you are a pre-seed or seed founder, you by definition have not done it before, especially if you have not built the equivalent of the technology or the physical good or anything in between. So what's an example, and feel free to type it in here on the chat, of a binary question, a polar question that someone's tried to use on you in order to force you down a path recently? And it could be something fun and anecdotal from your personal life, or it could be from your professional life. And again, feel free to chat here and in Zoom. I can see the chat, or maybe somebody here wants to kind of talk about it. But what's an example of a company that tries to put you in this position? Any ideas? Thoughts? Let's talk about buying a car. What's an example of a polar or binary question that someone like in a sales role, she, he, or they might come to you and ask, but it's meant to intentionally box you in?
What's your budget?
What's your budget? Or if I can give you this car today for the price you want, will you buy it today? Now, most of the time, we don't want to say yes or no in that moment because we don't know the price, we don't know about the car, we don't know about the availability. But it's a tricky thing that salespeople do that you can receive in order to force you into saying, yes, I'm qualified, or no, I'm not. Because once you've said, yes, I'm willing to buy if I get the price that I want today, then what that person's going to do is optimize for that simple exchange. Okay, if I can get this car to $18,500 today, will you walk off the lot with it? So we use binary or polar questions to anchor you into yes or no dynamics. One of the other things that we think about in the kind of mirror to this is using open questions. So what's an example of an open-ended question in that car buying example? When does someone allow you to have an unstructured question? Yeah, what are you looking for today? Now, why is someone using an open-ended question? What's the goal of that?
To identify what you value.
That's right. So you are, by definition, of an entire unstructured set of information, choosing the things you want to focus on, right? And Logan had a good example from the online chat. What are you looking for in a car today as well? Why would I use an open-ended question? What advantages do I have compared to maybe a closed question? Yeah.
Well, lets them sort of direct what they value rather than you try to play like, process of elimination.
That's exactly right. So as a buyer of services, let's say I am buying consulting services, why would I use an open-ended question? Is it because I want to be helpful or not helpful? What do you think?
You want to be helpful.
You want to be helpful. How so?
You want to understand what the other person is actually about.
Okay, great. So in the best actor kind of lens of that, which I very much appreciate, it's to say like, hey, show me what is important to you, right? Focus me on where we should prioritize today. What if they're trying to be a bad actor? What if they're trying to disqualify you from the process as a consultant? Why would they use an open question?
They'll look for the things that you don't mention.
That's right. If on one side it's a, hey, tell me how we're going to think about this together so we can co-design value. The other side of that is, hey, if you don't match what our early hypotheses are, you're going to spend the rest of that meeting defending your point of view. Right? Or I'm going to be able to point out to my boss so that she, he, or they can find themselves and say, yeah, but they clearly don't align from us from the very beginning. Now, there's some other types of questions that are grayed out here called probing and funnel and recall and process. But I'm going to focus next on leading. Sometimes people will call this telegraphing. Where do people use leading questions? Or what's an example of maybe a leading question? So I see Logan saying pigeonholing you. Right, online, they're kind of dragging you to a conclusion. Why would I use a leading question? What am I trying to do?
Trying to get the answer that you're looking.
That's right. I'm trying to push you or push pull you right into the answer I want. So I'm telegraphing you to a place. Now, in a good actor moment, the reason I'm doing that is I want to act like a tour guide. Right? Like I brought you in, I'm sponsoring you. This is great. Show me your software, show me your goods and services, show me your consulting abilities. I just want to make sure you touch on all the high notes or the key words that my boss cares about. When can it be used as a bad actor way?
Trying to sell you that product.
Yeah, trying to expose some of the biggest question marks in your office.
That's right. You're going to drag everybody away from maybe the big points and themes you want to have, and you're going to focus on the gotchas. Now, sometimes that is important, right? Sometimes that devil in the details expression really does come to life. And sometimes small changes that you do or don't do matter a lot to a very personalized scenario. But more often than not, if I'm telegraphing in a positive way using leading questions, I'm making sure we spend the least amount of time on the most important stuff. In the bad actor lens, I'm trying to drag you immediately to the really political landmines of my business so that we spend 90% of the time talking about it. Let's say we're selling artificial intelligence solutions. What's a really, really hot button issue in artificial intelligence? Large language models. Why?
Because it's, ChatGPT came out, everyone could interact with it. It was suddenly really, viral in that sense.
That's right.
They are explain it, but you don't know
how are they getting to the answer?
That's exactly right. So, hey, how would we focus on, listen, I'm sure you have a really amazing AI solution. You mentioned that you use a couple of these foundational models like ChatGPT or Hugging Face or whatever. Hey, how are you really different than them? Or are you just a wrapper like an app? That is a really hard question to dig yourself out of the hole of if someone's natural bias is everyone's just building superficial apps. Same thing with that nice black box comment, right? Hey, we have some pretty sensitive data in here. How can you guarantee me that OpenAI is not doing anything bad with my data? The truth is you can't, right? Not within reason. I mean, there's evolving ways to do it by hosting things on site. So the point is, telegraphing questions can immediately lead you or have you being led to really political, icky, sticky kinds of scenarios. And then there's this last one, which is rhetorical. What, in fact, is a rhetorical question?
Not really a question, it's a statement about what you should do.
That's right. It's a question in statement form. Why would someone use a rhetorical question in a bad actor way? Like, how does that become a hostile, frequently asked question?
Do we really have to answer that?
That's exactly right. You don't, or you do. The idea is rhetorical questions put personal currency between your business and the resources that you want to get intentionally. It's no longer about challenging and having you explore knowledge. It's about putting my title, my ego, my brand between you and your goal. And that just creates an amplification effect because now everything you say is personal. Because you've told me in no uncertain terms how you feel, we are no longer being collaborative or co-designing value. That's an icky moment. Okay, makes sense? All right, so we're going to focus on 4 different types of questions today in the next kind of 20, 25 minutes, just to kind of get your heads around where we're going. There's lots of other questions that we could focus on along the way. So with that in mind, think a little bit about either a pitch you've been part of or a pitch you'd like to be part of. And I would encourage everybody online to really think deeply about this as well. What's the question that you as a startup founder or part of the founding team, whether it's a program, a conference, a food cart, a piece of software, or anything else, what is the question you are most nervous about getting after you pitch your product or service? And I thought that it was funny that somebody let us off with, why can't Google just do this? Right, which is kind of almost a meme at this point. But why can't the big company that's the incumbent just do what you're doing along the way is one of those kind of hostile, frequently asked questions. Why are you the right person or the right team to execute on this, right? Are you fanatical about this? Do you have some incredible unfair advantage? What about others that want to kind of weigh in here? Try to find a way to come in. Best guesses are okay. How real is that problem? Really, really well said in traditional passive-aggressive translation or overtones of an investor or venture capitalist. What about your problem? Won't it make this problem worse, right? The compounding effect. Hey, you obviously don't understand and know the system that we have going on. What makes you feel like people will really use this? Meaning, what will create urgency, not just validation or affirmation of either the problem or the marketplace you have? So some really, really good questions in here. So thanks for those that kind of weighed in. If you can't see the QR code, you're always welcome to drop them in the Zoom chat for those that are online. So we understand already that there are lots and lots of questions we can have, but let's take a question like, what is your current traction? I want you to think in terms of what is your current traction? What is the root cause of that question? What's the investor really asking? What do you think? What's the hostile flavor?
Do you have the skills required to build a team and start developing a product?
That's right. Do you really have traction? Meaning, does anyone care? Can you actually demonstrate or deliver on what you're saying? And if you think about it, there's a couple other examples up here. So just take a second for those online to look and for those in the room to kind of glance, right? And see how on the top of this rows that we have, right, we see what sounds like a relatively innocent way to frame an idea. Hey, do you need to raise venture money to do this? And instead, or what that translates to is, hey, this might be a great lifestyle business. So part of what's really important, which is actually a little unfair to all of us that have to be on the stage behind the mic at the podium, is to know how to translate kind of passive FAQs into hostile FAQs. Because if we naturally translate what someone says, like they are not necessarily being collaborative or on our team, we more immediately zero in on the root cause of what that question actually is. And so when we start to generate these questions, I want to make sure that we preserve the optionality to know what someone said versus what they mean. In fact, one of the most common mistakes that early stage entrepreneurs have, or people that are doing even second or third time trips around entrepreneurship, is assuming that the same meaning the question had last time will apply today. And it's almost never the case. And it ultimately varies by stage. If someone asks you, do you need to raise venture money at the pre-seed phase, that might literally mean a question of, hey, can you bootstrap this? If someone asks you, do you really need to raise venture money at a more mature phase when you've already raised 1 or 2 rounds, they're basically telling you that it might be time to be written off as far as kind of nonlinear returns. So when someone asks, is as important as kind of who they are and why they are asking it, but it's important that you kind of spin some of those dimensions around. Make sense? All right. So another point that we want to focus on today, and we're going to illustrate a couple times in our exercise, is frankly the difference between confidence and differentiation. So what is confidence? And then compare that to differentiation. What do you think? First, what is confidence? How does that sound? What does it look like? What does it mean? Feel free to answer online as well. All right, what does confidence mean to you?
I don't know what I'm talking about.
Okay, great. Simple and clear definition, right? I really feel strongly that I know what I'm doing. That's one way to just demonstrate confidence. What else?
I would say confidence is how you walk and how you carry yourself.
Okay, so there's maybe a nonverbal component to that as well, right? If I was slouching over, right, and sort of being the Hunchback of Notre Dame, maybe I'm not as willing to expose, quite literally, my shoulders back and my chest out to express that, hey, I'm really excited. I'm willing to be confrontational, if not ambitious about this. What else? How would you describe confidence?
I'll say to be assertive.
Okay, what does that mean?
I think similar definition is to, like, even when facing questions or challenges, that you still have your ground.
Excellent.
Stand your ground.
So would it be fair to say that everybody in the room, and maybe some head nods or some thumbs up online, knows what confidence is, right? That's probably, at least maybe we can't always obtain it, but we certainly understand what it looks like, and we can pretty surely always recognize it in other people. And in fact, there's this interesting kind of body of work we did out of the research that said there's about 15 factors that executives look for across 3 major dimensions. One's called industry context, right? That's questions like, have you recently solved this problem? Or is anyone in your industry, like a third party, like a JD Power, saying you're really good at solving this problem? So that's industry context. There's another box of attributes called operator empathy, right? Do you know the vocabulary? Do you understand what specific ROI looks like in the field or the industry, right? That's what operators want to exchange with each other. And there's one called a category called execution, of which where things like you make it look easy or it feels easy, as well as confidence exist. It turns out, even today, in a world of functioning introverts, even as the tech and software eat us all together, turns out that confidence is still the #1 most important factor for executives to make a significant investment or back an early stage idea. Why is that true? Why is confidence so important still? What's a simple way to think about it?
I mean, I would think that a person that is pitching to you doesn't seem like they believe in what they're doing. Why should I believe?
That's exactly right. If you don't think you can do it, why should I think you can do it? Now, let's talk about differentiation. Who has a good definition or maybe a reaction or even kind of reading anecdotally what I have on the slide here? What is differentiation, especially as it compares to confidence? Because confidence is, hey, this is a bottle of water and I can drink it and not be thirsty anymore, right? That's what, for those on Zoom, I'm holding up my bottle of water and realizing that, like, I can be really confident and accurate about something. But this brand, Pure Life, is like a lot of brands of water. So even though I'm really confident that this is a bottle of water, really accurate that will cure my hydration, how differentiated was my discussion about this bottle of water? Did it feel like you should jump up right now and elbow your way to me and try to grab this bottle of water? Does it feel like this is roughly the water you could get almost anywhere? Okay, so you can be really confident, which is what we just talked about being the number one tool for an executive. You can be really accurate with a product or service, but you'll notice that nobody jumped up. Nobody was like, Adam, I need this bottle of magic water that you have, right? It doesn't cure your ails. It's not fixing some episodic or ritualistic condition. So what is differentiation then? And why is that important? So what is the role of differentiation?
Well, I guess compared to competence, competence is like knowing that I'm good and able, but differentiation is how I'm uniquely good and able.
Exactly. So what are some of the ways that people differentiate water? Please.
It can be the, like different pH levels.
That's right. Alkaline or pH, right? What else?
The source of
The source of the water, right? If you live in the state of New York, you pretty much get free bottled water all the time. If you live in Flint, Michigan, people probably have different feelings about it. What else? Packaging. How so?
There's new alternatives that we plastic, single-use. We have just water, box water.
That's right. We have box water, right? So kind of a paper carton dynamic. We have reusable water bottles. We have things like electrolytes. We have different types of physical twist stops, right? In case someone's differently abled or temporarily disabled in some, capacity. We have things that are in a variety of languages, et cetera, et cetera. So differentiation is what creates additive value from what someone otherwise expects. But more importantly, it shifts their perspective from importance around whatever you're selling or pitching to urgency to participate. And in venture, especially early stage, let alone all sales, it's about urgency creation, not importance affirmation. The most people that fail in their Q&A dynamics have done a really confident and accurate job because they have rehearsed the heck out of that 2-minute pitch. They fail at Q&A because they keep really confident and accurate, but they don't say anything that is differentiated. And that's what we're going to work on today. So what's an example, right? Or way that we can differentiate something. So if I were to ask you a question of what do you do at the Swartz Center for Entrepreneurship, I'm not looking for an answer here, but what type of attributes to that answer are you going to look at? So someone already put in social proof and rewards. Maybe we could kind of expand on that a little bit. Someone put in the icons. I'm assuming we could talk about all the robot wizardry we do. I see national experts, right? Both lowly faculty as well as guest speakers that are coming through. But what makes a differentiated answer if we were asking about the Swartz Center? Is it historical context? Is it facts and stats? Is it real testimonies from living and breathing? So let's go on the QR code, right, and scan, or go to slider.com and punch in that number. Again, now that we've warmed it up, feel free on the Zoom to kind of add a couple of chats, Logan or others, right? And tell me what you can add. So community bond, inspiration for ideas. So these are all attributes that would begin to illuminate how we would differentiate an answer. What's really important about this is there are only so many ways to differentiate a response. And frankly, sometimes you can only differentiate an answer so much if you're the person even saying it. So I want to highlight that sometimes you achieve differentiation by being specific, quantified, validated by third parties. Sometimes you ultimately deliver on a differentiated point of view because someone says it like a customer, right? Or a collaborator that's not you. Because at some point, me telling you as a company all the recycled materials I use for my bottle of water or how many electrolytes in it are still going to be comparative to 6 or 10 other brands. So the next level of differentiation might be the fact that my neighbor, who's a really amazing triathlete, drinks this specific water or takes that specific protein powder or rides that specific bike. And so what's important to realize is in your Q&A section, when a judge asks you a question, when he or they puts out something to you, sometimes you need to be able to answer it. Sometimes you need to be able to show somebody else answering it. And it's an important moment in time. So here's a really kind of simple takeaway for those that want to take a pic, or I'm assuming Allison will send these slides around to everybody, for where it is. That's where all my citations are. This is sort of, as a recovering consultant, I can't let you go more than 10 slides without at least having 1 2x2. So, at the risk of stating the obvious, right? There's confidence and there's differentiation. And like everything else on the planet, we want to be in the upper right. But you're going to also notice around each of these bands that I have a quantitative scale. And the reason why we are quantifying these answers is because it's really easy to answer with what we call an average response or a good enough response. That means that you are going to answer really accurately and confidently, but not necessarily very differentiated. The other reason why we have a quantitative response is that it gives people a specific and repeatable way to give you feedback other than, yeah, I like that or I didn't like that. Because oftentimes we spend so much time practicing our pitch and no real time practicing our Q&A. And in reality, we should actually spend about the reverse because Q&A can be literally anything. The pitch is actually a contained, structured, memorized experience. Make sense? Okay. So let's take an example since I heard it real time this morning about Shift, but also because Shift Robotics and the Moonwalkers just got featured in the top 100 inventions of the year from Timing this morning, which I thought was pretty cool. Same thing with Duolingo's music lessons also got featured in the 100 most innovative things that have happened. So good to see Pittsburgh at least on there twice, if not other places. And I'm sure Carnegie Mellon influenced a variety of the things that are on there. But I want to ask you a question on a scale. So let's say I have a differentiation scale where a 5 out of 5 means that I'm the only person that can say it. That's a really good thing. And a 1 out of 5 means that everybody on the planet can say it. What happens if all of my answers are a 3 out of 5? What happens to you as an entrepreneur? What happens in that pitch competition? What happens to you as someone who's maybe investing money? What happens if someone can only give you a 3 out of 5 differentiation answer, meaning it's good enough to feel like there's some best practice involved, but not good enough to stand out, like a 4 out of 5 or a 5 out of 5? What actually happens to you?
You get ignored.
Yeah, you get ignored. You're in a sea of mediocrity, not because you've done anything wrong, but because only the most differentiated things stand out. And that mirrors, especially in places like the McGinnis competition and other types of venture competitions, because everybody expects 20 to 30% of their portfolio to return for the whole fund. Obviously, if every one of you are bets, like the namesake of this center, like Jim Schwartz, when he just was, rainmaking, he was like the first in on like things like Facebook and, really early on a variety of other kind of Silicon Valley darlings. Sure, if you can nail that, where like 9 out of 10 of your big bets all return $1 billion, you don't have to worry about it. But in our case, being close to what already exists and not really having space that you've made for the most underserved people in an existing market is the fastest way for someone to say, yeah, that's great. You should definitely go do an accelerator program, but I'm not going to cut a check on you because you're not ready to sort of focus on the things that no one else is doing. You're only ready to try to catch up with my money to what everyone else expects. And that is a really, really expensive way to build a venture-backed business. So let's take an example like Moonwalkers, which is a mobility product. And let's focus on a really, really intentionally not differentiated way to describe those shoes that you strap onto your feet. So whenever to go on the Slido code, right? QR code or Slido.com. And I want you to think about how to explain Moonwalkers, the robotic shoes to your feet that is the least differentiated possible compared to things like bikes or e-bikes, horses, sneakers, buses, trains, other forms of mobility. Expensive electric scooters, faster rollerblades. It moves you around. That might be my favorite one. That is an excellent 1 out of 5. Lack of differentiation. They're like motorized rollerblades, motorized rollerblades, motorized rollerblades. I can see that we have a little bit of groupthink going on. It is a vehicle to move you from A to B. So what are we observing here? What's happening when I intentionally don't tell you to be differentiated? These answers are all accurate, by the way. And I imagine they're kind of confident.
They're just very generalized.
Yeah. And what happens to an investor? So if I said, hey, investor, let's say they come out of your 1 minute pitch and maybe they came in late or their principal was there and they say, okay, like, what would you say you do here? And you say, hey, we're like expensive rollerblades. Or we move people from point A to point B. What's going to happen to that investor?
They'll just get up and leave. They'll be like, we've seen 100 others like this, why didn't we invest?
That's right. Yeah. And even if they don't physically get up and leave, they will mentally get up and leave, right? They will do what investors do really well. They will smile at you and they will start to multitask in their brain, which is the worst death an entrepreneur can face, because they'll be like, yeah, this is amazing. We'll definitely talk about it with our partners. And they will not talk about it with their partners. They will say things like, hey, I met these folks. When I asked them what they did, they said they did what every other bike does on the planet, which is move you on wheels from one place to another. Okay, so we now understand what not to do in the hostile FAQ section after a pitch, which is a 1 out of 5. Now let's use some of our explainers. Let's take this exact same product or service and let's think about how to make it a 3 out of 5. So now we have gone from 1 out of 5, meaning everyone on the planet can say it that has a mobility solution, to 2 out of 5, which is getting a little domain specific, but 80% of the people can still kind of claim it, to 3 out of 5, which is only about 60% of the market can kind of claim the same value or proposition. How would you evolve the 1 out of 5 to a 3 out of 5? And this is important because if you can't see what a bad example looks like, it's very rare that you can see what a good example looks like. So if you can hit that QR code, or you can go to slido.com, and if you're feeling like this is an opportunity to check out, this is actually the sort of bedrock of being an entrepreneur, because at any given moment, you need to understand your audience and be able to tune generic to specific or generalist to specialist. So all-terrain last mile transportation for individuals, love some of that. Motorized rollerblades, apparently we are being, reinforcing kind of our existing kind of model. Moves you more safely than a bike, right? We're trying to be a little comparative here, although we're introducing other kind of competitors in our headspace, so that can have a little bit of catch-22. Using robotics to move people faster, right? That's probably starting to get us there, but I would say, cars and everybody else probably feels that they also use robotics, or they manufacture with robotics and move people faster. So we see sort of an example, but what are we starting to notice as we've asked everybody to get more differentiated? What are we noticing in the answers? Are they getting longer or shorter?
Longer.
Okay, what else?
They're getting more into the value proposition.
That's right. They're starting to go from definitional or kind of broadcast statements, right? Things that make the speaker feel really good because there's kind of no way to deny them, right? There's really no way to argue with. We are motorized or robotically induced like rollerblades, right? That is a statement of fact, right? That's not a persuasion and influence frame, right? That is a definitional frame or a broadcast frame. So feels really good for me, 0% progress you're going to get from an investor. Now we've moved it up to a 3 out of 5, where now we're starting to feel like we're becoming competitive, but pretty much everyone who is more or less a good actor and has best practices can be a 3 out of 5. So now the question becomes, how do I make this a 4 out of 5 or a 5 out of 5? And I want you to focus on not capturing longer statements, but rather focusing on the 1 to 3 points that other people can't say. And so I might give you an example while you're typing. So if I was going to talk about moonwalkers, it says the only motorized mobility option that you can hang on your backpack weighing less than 3 or 4 pounds, charges once a week, and helps you move from that bus that is 15 minutes away to the office that you hate commuting to with no better option, to avoid paying $20 a day in parking. So there's a variety of things that I have introduced there, right? An economic value prop, a specific and quantified about when this happens, right? The kind of before and after, like I am someone who gets off a bus or another form of mass transit, right? But needs a 1 mile. I'm someone who doesn't want to carry around a 75-pound foldable bike, right? Or a 20-pound awkward e-scooter, right? That I have to figure out some place to store, whether it's in my apartment or my home or my work office. So leveraging top-notch robotics. So we see here the general thing that's happening. So is it fair to say, though, that we haven't probably nailed a 5 out of 5 because most people here don't work on moonwalkers? Yeah.
I would agree. I had a question for you.
Please.
It looks like one of the responses is actually the slogan of Step into the World's Fastest Shoes. I think that I've seen that. My question is, like, that doesn't really get to a lot of the features or value or clarifying product descriptions that we're kind of talking.
That's exactly right. And so you're kind of, you are not a Planet My Audience, but you're being a Planet My Audience, which is to say, hey, I just asked 50 plus people to describe something that timing thinks is the 100 best inventions on the planet. And not a single person actually gave me a compelling definition. Right? Now, these are good marketing slogans, right? There's curiosity that's developing here. So it's really important and intriguing, but it's not really motivating for me to buy. And so what we're illustrating and what we're seeing here is all of the amazing videos we can see and the demos we can watch, people riding around on these shoes that illustrate the idea and show you how to operate them, are not going to bail you out, right? When someone asks you a simple question of like, hey, what would you say is the most differentiating factor for moonwalkers compared to all the other micromobility options? Now, here's an honest question. How likely is it that that company is going to get a question exactly like that? Okay. How scared should we be that not a single person in this room, whether they were working on the team or not, necessarily nailed a true 4 out of 5 or 5 out of 5? So I want to highlight that this is where we fall down, especially at CMU. We conquer incredible mountains of really hard tech. We combine really genre-bending ideas and timing into moments. But when it really comes down to it, we get paralysis about how to get specific and quantified, because in order not to be wrong, we're never actually making a commitment to be specific and right. Now, what this kind of branches into, and we have some resources at the end that we've made available here at Schwartz, is that consultative selling, when you are on the sales side of this equation, not on an investor pitch, allows you under false promises to ask in your mind 10 or 15 questions to that person to qualify how you would answer this question. In reality, investors will not give you any opportunity to range find with where they are. He or they will just say, great, how would you differentiate this project next to some random idea that I have with all the bias that I bring to this situation? And in that moment, you have to do it. So this is the kickoff, not the conclusion of how you have to start inventorying these frequently asked questions. And this is a wake-up call, what you're seeing on the screen, to how you have to workshop this with your colleagues and your classmates and your co-founders or your community friends, right, in order to bring this together. Is this resonating what we're trying to illustrate in front of everybody about how everyone thinks that they're a superhero when they get the Q&A, and then you get up there and you're like, yeah, no problem, I know everything about this. And then you answer it like a brochure. So unless you want to be like a 1990s website, you know, we have to do something a little different. Now, we are going to take about 5 minutes here just to kind of give you an example. And if you can kind of just pair with someone who's either next to you, or if you have a non-number, it's perfectly okay to be threes. But I want each person for just 1 minute. Hopefully you have a product or service you're thinking about marketing. If not, feel free to default to somebody else's and decide. But in 1 minute, I want you to think of either a closed and open, a leading or rhetorical question about a product or service. And if you don't have one that you are pitching, pick any of your product or service you've bought recently. And I want you to ask yourself how you would answer that in a really differentiated way once you've thought of the really hostile way somebody would ask you a question about it. Make sense? Okay. So, you know, if you've already kind of connected with people that you already know, maybe this is a time to kind of maybe just like look forward or backwards and shake it up here. If you're online, feel free to, you know, kind of work this shop independently of everyone else for what's going on. But the idea here is I want you to think of a question. If you go ahead and type your question, by the way, in the chat, I will go ahead and react. But let's go ahead and think of one polar, open, rhetorical, or leading question that we have, and we can come together. And then we'll come back in just 2 minutes. We'll talk a little bit about how that went. All right, at this point, you should have identified a question. And so you want to now think about how you're going to answer it. Each person can answer, one person can answer. And then just to kind of be in sync with time, I want you to push back really hard on was that differentiated or not. So you're going to pick your question, right? It's probably hostile. You're going to have someone try to answer it. The other person or the other two people are then going to say, candidly, I'll give you a 1 out of 5, which means that I heard you and it was accurate and it was competent, but I didn't really feel any differentiation compared to all the other competitors I'm thinking in my brain, or 5 out of 5 or somewhere in between. I will tell you by default, if someone is over a 3, you should ask the person who gave you more than a 3 why it was specifically differentiated, because it's a very rare moment to start it. Okay, so let's take another 60 or 75 seconds to bring it together and workshop the idea and see how you can make the answer to that hostile question at least a 3, if not a 4 or a 5 out of 5. Make sense? All right, we'll take 2 more minutes.
So.
You know, in this last moment, I want you to think about how to really push on someone's answer, right? Challenge them to be more quantified, specific. You could throw an actual competitor at them or what you're thinking in your brain about why you would maybe not change your behavior, why you would do it internal, why you'd spend money on something else, why you would delay spending. Really come honest with them, right? About why you would not move it and why you're not feeling it. This is not a great inflation moment, right? This is a tell them the real truth. So last 30 seconds, tell them, hey, this is what in my bones I am feeling and why I'm pushing back, or hey, this is in my bones why I feel like somebody else is going to push back. All right, everybody, let's kind of refocus here in the last minute. So this is one of those moments where if you can just direct all your attention this way, those on Zoom, thank you for immediately snapping to it. So obviously this is going to kick off a variety of moments. Guys, can I get you to focus here for just 1 sec? Gentlemen, guys, can I borrow you for 1 sec? All right, there we go. So we're almost wrapped up. So the idea here is it obviously brings out a lot of kind of like interesting conversation. You have a bunch of feels. Like, what were you observing as you were trying to be differentiated or as somebody was pushing back? Was anyone kind of feeling or acting a certain kind of way? Everybody just nailed it on the first time? No? Why not?
So we were taught, we didn't have any products, so we were using the Moonwalker as an example.
Great.
And she had a lot of really good questions on comparing this with sales. And I guess I don't know too much about the Moonwalker products. Also, part of the reason why I couldn't answer a lot of the questions, but yeah, we had a good back and forth comparing the merits of what's good.
Yeah, here's a little dirty secret, right? From somebody who's pitched in a lot of competitions over the years. Very rarely are you actually differentiating against your most direct competitor. More often than not, you are differentiating against either the analog behavior or the incumbents or another kind of analogous proxy, right? So what I really loved about your feedback is that moonwalkers don't really have, I mean, I'm sure I would stand corrected. I'm sure there are other micromobility options that strap to your feet, but we just don't see as many of them, right? So maybe in the direct competitor category, there's a handful of kind of strap-on shoes that have batteries, but probably not a ton. But there are hundreds of variants on micromobility of scooters that are electronic and otherwise, or mechanical, that you can strap to your back and that you can carry at your side. And they even come with advantages, right? Like they might be slightly more durable on places like ice, or they might go a slightly longer distance, or you might be able to walk uphill at a more accelerated rate, like we saw the spin scooters around town. So it's important to realize that within this kind of Q&A battle that we can ultimately expose, not just the specificity that's going to be required to make an impression on the investor and create urgency, but kind of anchor on where everyone's starting their comparison about, does this create value in my life? Because creating value generally is not the same as creating value specifically. And a lot of the FAQs that we get at the end of a pitch are not because someone doesn't think the TAM or the market is big enough, or that you didn't do a good enough job articulating about why 6 really smart CMU students could do a thing. It's that you didn't actually tell them that if you went into a Walmart parking lot and you asked the average person that was coming in there, or you went to the average Fortune 500 business and said, would you buy my software? They weren't like, yes. They were like, cool, cool, cool. What you got? And that feels like a good thing, but it can actually be a tragically bad thing, because general affirmation, when you have not enough cash or not enough time or not enough people, gets you to spend a lot of time working on the general problem as opposed to carving out the specific need you're trying to raise money against. And so in the last just kind of 1 or 2 minutes here, really all I want you to focus on now is reminding yourself that a 3 out of 5 is basically a 1 out of 5. And when you think about the questions that you're going to inventory around a pitch competition or raising money or applying for a job or anywhere you're trying to persuade and influence someone, whether you are the product or you're building a product or service, that a 3 out of the 5 is the same as the 1 out of 5, because everyone can pretty much get, in terms of marketing, to a 3 out of 5. When you are not standing around, but lowly professors are in the Swartz Center, remind yourself that you can use this type of customer-centered design as opposed to human or user-centered design to validate your opportunity. When you are pitching or doing a pitch deck, it's the same as building any other product or service that you fundamentally have. So take this example, spin it out, go try this moment with everybody else. Okay. We also have a tool online called Skill Builder if you want something more than a Google Sheet. So let me give you the 2 options. 1, build a Google Sheet. Here are the columns, and we're going to record this and send it out. Questions. That's where you write out the question you think you're going to get at the end of your pitch. Just rate it by 2 factors: how frequently it's going to happen and how important you think it is. I use the determinants of always, sometimes, rarely for frequency. And I use a scale of 1 out of 5, which basically means 5 means if I get this question and I don't answer it right, I'm fired. 1 out of 5 means that, like, it's probably a question that's going to come up, but not a thing that really matters. And it's probably somewhere in my marketing site's FAQs. The 4th column is answers. That's the answer to the question, what we just explored together. And the only 2 factors you need to measure are how confident you are, scale of 1 out of 5, and how differentiated you think that answer is. And if you take away nothing from this for $0 and 0 cents, you can build that 6-column Excel or Google Sheet, and you can do it online. If you want a free or low cost to do this, we also have built a tool called Skill Builder. If you ever run into a problem paying for it, you can just text or email me, and I will happily give you a code for as long as you need it as a CMU student or alumni that makes it $0. But there's a bunch of other featured stuff along the way, including some AI to help you generate the questions that you need to answer, or by definition, the AI to help you answer those very questions. There's some other resources we have here at the Swartz Center, thanks to Dave Maloney and crew like Allison, who's in the room, who can get you online. If you liked what we were talking about as far as the persuasion and influence hostile FAQs, thinking about things like confidence and other factors, you can go to this first course that we've generated. I've used the code FF 2023, Forbes Fund 2023, which is a foundation in town that subsidized it on behalf of the Swartz Center. You can get that course for free. If you want a design thinking course, which allows you to do things like stakeholder maps and storyboards and abstraction ladders, this is also a brand new course out here. There's over 25 hours of recorded high production lecture on both of these topics. We obviously don't have time in the 60 minutes we had today together. If you want to follow along, there's some other experiments we run. If you've met me in another life here at CMU, you know we do this thing called the 20-10-10. This is an exercise that helps you surface ideas, products, capabilities, problems that you are particularly passionate about. If you don't have an idea, the direct link to the Miro templates is below. You should always subscribe to the Swartz Center and the newsletter. That's where you get to in the bit.ly link. That's how you might have found out about the Connect series. If not, every week, the team here does an incredible job of organizing and curating what's available. If you want to see some of my other pro bono experiments, I do all my nerd work at MAD Labs, which is conveniently Adam misspelled. So that's MAAD labs.io, along the journey where you can see all the other type of experiments, templates, and open source or open core software that I have. I will happily stick around for a couple of minutes, but I know everyone's got a million things to do. So thanks for listening today. A little bit about organizing FAQs. Hopefully you'll take this baby first step to writing down at least your top 10 or 20 questions that you think you might get in response to your pitch or in response to your sales presentation. You can use tools like Skill Builder. You can use free things like Google Sheets. And if you ever need any help, I actually also have an appointment here in the Swartz Center where many of you I have met along the way, where we can take 20 or 25 minutes and actually work through the specific questions. All you have to do is email Alex and become an official member of the Swartz Center. If you do that, then you just get my Calendly link and you can grab whatever 20 minutes works for you. Allison, any final words of wisdom you want on the recording? Okay, thanks everybody. We'll see you soon.